Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi, to Ask Zajef Neuvillette Edition. As usual, when there's a character rerun, I ask you guys to send me your questions in the Twitch chat on stream. But before we get into your questions, we talk about how strong they are overall, what their place in the meta is, and if there have been any changes since their last either rerun or their initial run. So, let's get started. How strong is Neuvillette? Neuvillette is definitely the best carry in the game if you're looking at C0 5 stars, C6 4 stars. And he's arguably the best unit in the game right now. The main reason why I think that he's definitely, not just arguably, but definitely the best carry in the game is because he has all of these great quality of life features. But then on top of that, he's also up there along with the other great carries in terms of the ceiling for DPS that you can reach at C0, R0, the 5-star stuff. I don't think that it matters that much that he's strong. Or rather, the portion of his power that comes from the amount of damage that he does, it's important, but there's not much to say about it. Yes, he does great damage, and that's kind of it. There's not much else to say about that. If we're gonna make a list of most important quality of life features that Neuvillette provides that a lot of other carries don't, firstly, he doesn't die. Right, you can see, and obviously not every Neuvillette is going to have as much HP as mine does, where I'm playing him in double Hydro, so that's Hydro Resonance, which not every Neuvillette team has. And then just build specific, I'm using an HP weapon, whereas it's very possible that the weapon you're using is substat that's different than HP, right? You could be using crit weapon or something like that. And I'm using an HP Goblet. Even if you're not doing that, even if you're doing a crit weapon and like only one HP main stat on the sands, you'll still get over 30k HP. On top of that, every time you start a charge attack, you heal to full HP. And that happens 3 to 4 times per rotation. And that happens even if you get staggered and you lose your charge attack. The defensive portion of his kit, the part where he heals up, happens pretty much no matter what. And so he heals a lot and he's really tanky. So that's like the first thing. The second thing is his AoE. Whenever there's 2 enemies, Neuvillette is pretty much guaranteed to hit them. So you've got your Abyss Chamber, very cool. You've got 2 enemies. You've got one here, you've got one here. What does Neuvillette do? Neuvillette stands here and shoots his beam. Rotate right 70 degrees. There you go. All right, and bam, crazy, you hit both of them. Oh no, the enemies are ungrouping. The enemy that was standing here decides to do an attack that sends him this way. They're now like this. What do? Well, you keep shooting, but you move that way as well, and you start aiming this way. And you keep hitting all of them. As long as there's only 2 enemies, you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to consolidate your AoE against the whole room. When there's 3 enemies, there starts being the possibility of not hitting literally everything. If the 3rd enemy is standing all the way over here, you won't be able to hit all of them. On top of that, the width of his beam is actually pretty large. But like, even if the beam is like just barely adjacent, it still hits. Diameter is a better word to use, you're right. The diameter of his beam is pretty large. On top of that, and I think this is probably the one that the least amount of people know or realize, the beam kind of hits behind you a bit. Which means the actual range of it, not just the size of the AoE, is pretty damn long. The range of the beam is actually bigger than the radius. Not quite the diameter, but it's bigger than the radius of this like circle that you see around like this. That's the second like big point of his quality of life. The third point is his rotations are like really straightforward. While there are buffs he benefits from a lot, he's not the sort of character that is worthless without them. If you don't have that much HP left on an enemy, you don't necessarily have to start a full other rotation launching all of your buffs again. I think the character that represents the other side of that coin the best is probably Gumming. If anyone has ever played Gumming, the drop in damage when your buffs run out is so noticeable. Whereas with Neuvillette, while it is still noticeable, you'll still be able to do some damage without any buffs. The fourth point of his quality of life is his team building. Neuvillette is not a character that has amazing free-to-play teams. However, he has a part of his kit that kind of cheats team building. What I mean by that is, you compare him to like Arlecchino, for example. One of Arlecchino's best teams is Bennett, Chevreuse, Fischl. This is arguably Arlecchino's best overall team. And this is a team that runs 3 4-star characters that aren't reliant on 5-star weapons. That is just a very strong team. And so, Arlecchino's a character where you could say that she has amazing free-to-play teams. But when it comes to Neuvillette, there is a relatively sizable difference between his premium teams and his free-to-play teams. However, he's not dependent on any particular unit for those free-to-play teams. So again, going back to Arlecchino, while Arlecchino does have great teams that only use 4-star characters, she needs the good 4-star characters, and she needs a bunch of them. Neuvillette, on the other hand, while his 4-star only teams are worse than his teams with Farina, the 4-stars you use with him kind of don't really matter that much. And because of all of the other quality of life features that he has, getting close to your theoretical maximum DPS for a team in practice is much easier on his teams than on other teams, which means that he's arguably the easiest character or the strongest character in random bullshit teams. And the reality is that a lot of people play Genshin by kind of just not putting too much thought into their team building, and that's not an inherently bad thing, right? Obviously, people like me that enjoy the combat system and the way that the combat system is designed are going to spend a lot of time thinking about team building and stuff like that, and that's how I approach the game and enjoy it. But that's not the case for everyone, and some people just don't really care that much. And some people enjoy the combat without caring too much about the way it's designed. And Neuvillette has the ability of making that kind of trivial. Not that he doesn't gain anything from being put in good teams, but he can probably still 36-star Abyss almost no matter what. And I think that's pretty nice, because it also means that it allows you, even if you do understand team building, it allows you to play units that are kind of ass and that you wouldn't really be able to 36-star otherwise in your Neuvillette teams and still get your 36 stars. That being said, it's not like something like that has no downside. Because it's so easy to get close to theoretical maximum DPS on his teams, and because team building matters so little for him, you kind of just aren't really playing. The biggest reason why I barely play Neuvillette in Abyss unless I'm doing like testing and I just put Neuvillette on the other side just so I can get through my chambers. But like when I do Abyss runs, I barely ever play Neuvillette anymore. And the reason for that is because it kind of feels like an autoplay button. It's the same reason why when I played Star Rail, I didn't use autoplay. It's because it kind of just happens. And I use Neuvillette a decent amount for spending my resin for the same reason, because it's kind of like I'm not doing artifact domains because I want to get enjoyable fights against Avatar of Lava. I'm doing artifact domains to spend my resin and get that out of the way. Now, with all of that being said, does that mean that Neuvillette is a character who is necessary for your account to be strong? No, not at all. While he definitely consolidates pretty much all of the quality of life features that a character can have into one character, learning to deal with a character's weaknesses is an enjoyable thing for many people. And there are a decent amount of other characters that have teams that are competitive with Neuvillette's great teams. When Milani's release came around, alright, this shit happened. We're not here to get stun locked. The reason why there were actually some people who believed that Milani was better than Neuvillette, and I'm sure there are some people who still do, is because Milani is a character who is great at speedrunning. Milani's greatest advantage is the way that she frontloads her damage and her ability to scale with more different stats than Neuvillette does, because you add EM into the list of available stats, can get her higher ceiling front-loaded damage, which allows her to clear a chamber faster even if the DPS against a theoretical infinite HP enemy is lower. Now, Milani has a lot of issues with quality of life that Neuvillette does not have. But if everything goes right, her ability to front load her damage means that she can get faster clears than Neuvillette. And that's how some people got to the conclusion that Milani was better than Neuvillette. Now, I think that's a kind of corned conclusion. However, I do understand how they got there. And while I disagree with it, I do think that the situations in which Milani is or can be better than Neuvillette are definitely important to think about when thinking about which character to go for. If you are someone who cares a lot about speedrunning, maybe Milani would be better for your account than Neuvillette, because maybe that's what you need. In any case, I guess the last thing before we get into actual questions, which I realize we've done an intro that is much longer than usual, but I kind of needed to get all of that out of the way. Last thing is what's changed since his last rerun, and honestly, not much. I guess the biggest change since his last rerun, I mean, there is Xilonen, but honestly, I don't think Xilonen's release was that big of a deal for Neuvillette. I think the biggest difference since his last rerun is just the amount of good carries we have. There's just a few more good carries now that can be alternatives to him. And maybe more importantly is what's coming next. As of right now, Mavuika is in her 5th version in the beta as of recording this, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about Mavuika leaks, so if you want to avoid leaks, here's your warning. You can use the timestamps to skip over this portion. Mavuika is strong. She got a massive nerf from version 3 to version 4, and then pretty much no change from 4 to 5. But even after that nerf, she's still a very strong character, and a very significant portion of her strength is the initial hit of her burst, and just the sheer amount of damage that it does, which means that Mavuika is a character that's going to have similar strengths to Milani, right? The ability to front load that damage, but with a lot less of the quality of life issues / caveats that Milani has, but with kind of slightly more restricted team building. And then on top of that, assuming everything goes right, her actual output is going to be pretty damn high. And the reason why I think it's important to mention Mavuika is because obviously Mavuika is going to be the next banner, or maybe I'm not entirely sure she's the first banner in 5.3, but she's either the first or the second. And that means that a lot of people are going to be hesitating between getting Neuvillette now or saving their primos to go for Mavuika next patch. To those people that are hesitating, I would say that even with all of her strengths, I would still lean towards Neuvillette being a better overall carry, but I'm not entirely sure about that. If you're hesitating between the two, and again, right, this is assuming there are no changes from current beta version, which is very possibly not going to be the case. If you're looking for more information on that, make sure you subscribe. I'll be releasing my Mavuika pre-release video once we get into later beta cycles and we get closer to the patch drop. If you're hesitating between the two in Mavuika's current state, I'd say that they're close enough in power that going for the one you like the most is very, very reasonable. In any case, that does it for the preamble to the Ask Zajef video. We are now ready to take the questions. Is Ororon really that much worse than Xilonen? Yes. The first thing is Ororon's uptime is actually not great in these teams. It's not bad, but if you play it, you will notice that enemies kind of spend a decent amount of time with no Electro, because his trigger condition for triggering his A4 damage, or A1 damage, I guess, is dealing Night Soul Line damage with other characters, which doesn't happen, and enemies taking Electro Charge damage, which only happens so long as his burst is going. Which means you only have 9 seconds of uptime on his stuff, and then he just stops doing anything. And he doesn't really have that much damage if that's all he has. And it's not that he's a bad character, like he works in the teams, and even once he stops doing his damage, the fact that he has already procced Cinder City and given Neuvillette one more stack of his passive, it doesn't disappear, and Neuvillette's damage won't change, but obviously it's less than the damage you gain from Xilonen. On top of that, something that I noticed a decent amount when I did some testing with Ororon earlier is in teams that don't run Farina, Ororon feels unplayable. When you look at the non-Farina teams where Neuvillette is your only Hydro unit, you generally really like having an Animal unit to get your swirl. And here I'm putting Ororon and Fischl here just to compare the two of them. So when you're using Fischl, you can get your Hydro Swirl very easily. In order to get your Hydro Swirl on Ororon though, if you do the normal stuff, as you can see, we didn't get our swirl. Because in order to get your Swirl and Ororon, you can't just do skill and burst, because if you do, because skill plus burst animation time is longer than just Ozcast. If you do skill and burst, you'll get 2 Electro Charge procs by the time you swap to Kazuha, and that means Rip Bozo. It's Jover. You can still do it in other ways. Like, you still have options, but you have less options, and it just feels like shit. I guess that's not that big of a deal, because you do still have options, but I don't know, man. Since Neuvillette uses 3 of the best supports in the game, who would you say is his best partner character on the opposite side of the abyss? When you're looking at the best Neuvillette teams, you definitely want Farina. He can function without Farina, however, you definitely want Farina. Outside of that, I think there's a decent amount of flexibility. And so if you're looking at characters on the second side, I don't think characters that rely on Xilonen or Kazuha or Zhongli, I don't think those characters are inherently ruled out. But obviously, a character that isn't relying on any of those, you'll be pretty happy with that. As a general rule, I tend to like characters that rely on Bennett on the other side, or Dendro teams. Those are like the 2 things I tend to like the most. Bennett teams and Dendro teams. What I tend to play the most often tends to be Arlecchino, either in a Chevaliers team that has no overlap at all with Neuvillette teams, at least the better Neuvillette teams, or something like this, which has some potential overlap, but I can just do something like this on the other side. You can also do Hyper Bloom teams, which have no overlap whatsoever. And obviously, you'll have a lot of other options. Any Chevaliers team has pretty much no overlap. But when it comes to the question of which is Neuvillette's best partner, it probably is Arlecchino. Can you go over unconventional or unique Neuvillette teams? So the thing about Neuvillette is there is not a single team in the game for Neuvillette that doesn't function whatsoever. The worst Neuvillette team is probably Neuvillette, Candace, Barbara, Ayato, maybe? The worst possible Neuvillette team is a team that only has Hydro units, so you can't get any stacks of his passive, and none of the Hydro units do anything for him. That's like the worst possible Neuvillette team, and it's honestly probably still gonna clear in time. Maybe not in this abyss, because obviously we have an enemy with like, what is it, 70% Hydro resistance without any shred, so that's a little rough. It might still be doable. I kind of want to try it now. Okay, it doesn't look like it's gonna work out. Okay, it didn't work out, whatever. But yeah, so the answer to the question, are there any unconventional Neuvillette teams? I mean, sure. But are there any teams that, like, do anything that's, like, real? That are unconventional Neuvillette teams, or, like, that take advantage of a real, like, interesting interaction or anything like that? I mean, not really. I've already talked in the past about the Neuvillette Hyper Bloom team, where you run Dea as a way to enable a few forward vapes on the charge attacks. That's probably the closest you'll get to an unconventional Neuvillette team. How skill intensive are Neuvillette vape teams compared to his hyper teams, Farina, Xilonen, Kazuha? Do they offer significantly faster clears, especially with high investment? I'm bored of his usual playstyles and wondering if they're worth trying without being a speedrunner. I'd say that they are significantly harder to play. Vape Neuvillette teams tend to involve a lot more strict rotations, and the return you get for it is pretty low. The return you get for it if you don't have Farina available is high, because if you don't have Farina available, Neuvillette's teams are decently worse. And Farina pretty much entirely prevents proper vape Neuvillette teams. Now, the gap between good Farina Neuvillette teams and vape Neuvillette teams isn't actually that high, which means that playing those vape Neuvillette teams versus playing other Neuvillette teams that don't have Farina, like, there is a pretty good return for the amount of effort you're putting in. But that really is only the case if you don't have Farina available to you. Otherwise, it's kind of not really worth it, in my opinion. Is R5ing Amber worth the billets, or can I get away with just R1? R5ing Amber makes things more comfortable. And I guess, let's use this as an opportunity to talk about Neuvillette's ER requirements. Strictly speaking, Neuvillette, especially when you play him with Farina, doesn't tend to have particularly high ER requirements, if he has ER requirements at all. However, it happens very often that enemies die in the middle of a rotation, and it can happen that you need more ER for any particular reason. The reason why that can happen is because if you get staggered out of a charge attack, you just lose the balls, right? Which means you need to generate more if you want to keep doing damage. Neuvillette is not a character where you tend to use his burst off cooldown. You tend to just use the burst when your skill isn't available, and you need balls. Which means if everything is going right, you don't often use your burst more often than once every 24 seconds. But as soon as something goes wrong, being able to use it is going to make a pretty big difference. And so, in my experience running, like, pretty much no ER Neuvillette outside of Proto Amber, it tends to feel pretty bad. There are a decent amount of situations in a practical Abyss run where you notice the lack of ER. Because of that, I think that Proto Amber refinements are fairly significant for him, and they make him feel noticeably better. Now, is it worth the billets? It depends on how much you value your billets. Do you need them for something else? I don't know. Does Citlali improve his current best teams? Can she replace Kazuha with her for Neuvillette? Okay, so improve his best team? I don't know. I don't think so. But she's definitely going to be a fairly strong option for his teams. What about Lan Yan? Also, not really like an improvement on his best teams, but it does give him more options. As a new account, Neuvillette Haver, 1 month old account, what would be the next best future upgrades? Realistically, once you have Neuvillette, if you're like a relatively new account that's trying to long-term get to a point where you're strong, what you want is you want Farina for your Neuvillette team, and then the rest of your Neuvillette team doesn't really matter, and then you want a good team for the second side. Now your options for the good team for the second side, there's gonna be a lot of them, so you just pick whichever one you want. You showcase a Xilonen Kazuha Xiangling vape rotation and seem to get all Neuvillette stacks. I haven't really played a team like that, so I don't know if it'll be good, if my rotation will be the best possible. But I can tell you how you get your stacks, at the very least. I can't be bothered building my characters properly, but you won't be able to burst on Xilonen, otherwise you'll lose your Hydora and you'll have to swap back Neuvillette, which is gonna be cringe. You need to swap fast. I don't know if it's possible at high ping, it probably isn't, but I don't know what the ping, like, limit would be. Is there a good alternative for Xilonen in that vape team? Kachina? No. Kachina is actually worse than Child. Child giving you the talent level and Hydro Resonance is kind of just better than what Kachina can give you. Cringe about Kachina. The same thing that's cringe about Xilonen rotations. You need Hydro for your Crystallize and Hydro for your VV, your Swirl. But you want to swap to your Geo unit before you swap to your Animal unit because VV uptime is shorter. Whereas with this, you don't have to worry about that. Obviously, against an enemy that has Hydro resistance like this one, only having one source of shred is going to be significantly worse than having multiple. As you can see, even with 270 ER with Fab, it's like not really enough, which is the biggest issue. And that's gonna be it. So, as usual, thank you for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube. Silence! Settle down. The tides beckon. Let the mighty be humbled. Oh yeah, should I do a French voice line? Wait, it says